Okay, I think we can start. So this week the topic of the lecture was structured prediction. Um, so I did not get time to go through the entire lecture. So most probably we'll be doing. I mean, yeah, we will be doing half of the lecture. Um, but then I realized that there are only 18 slides in the whole PDF. I was expecting something like 50 or something, looking at the duration of the lecture. So we'll actually be covering till slide 15, I think, slide 18. So yeah, I know, I'm not sure if we'll be having too much for the next session. So we may be doing two in the next. I mean, we'll be combining the next notebook as well in the next lecture, depending on how dense the latter half of the video is. Okay. Yeah. So this lecture is basically about structured prediction. So before we get into it, let's just look at what structured prediction actually is. I hope you guys can see my screen right now. Um,
Yes.
okay. So structured prediction is basically when you have a huge number of classes. So I lifted this particular slide from. So there was this course called Neural Nets for NLP by in CMU. So I just lifted this slide from that. So what this is so this was in particular specific to NLP. So you have your binary classification where you can classify a sentence as positive or negative, and and then you can have multi-class classification where you classify a sentence into one of five categories, and then you have what is called structured prediction, um, where where it's basically sequence labeling, right? So this is part of speech tagging, where you are classifying each word into its part of speech, um, like prepositional, something, verb, and determinant, etc. And this one is translation. So both of these are examples of structured prediction. So even something like named entity recognition, I think, is a form of structured prediction, because you have to classify um, each word in the sequence. And then he talks about in that lecture he mentioned, like, he just talks about as a simple exercise of calculating the number of classes for these sentences. For this one you have two classes, for this one you have these five classes. So if you take the part of speech tagging of this sentence, uh, suppose there are k types of uh, parts of speech, and the length of the sentence is L. The number of classes is actually k into k into k, L times, right? That is the number of classes that you can classify this sentence into. That's k raised to L. And for translation, it's basically infinite. Because the length is, it can be arbitrarily long. Um, so the number of classes is actually infinite in translation. So this type of prediction problem is what is referred to as structured prediction, where you have some kind of like combinatorial object, or yeah, basically many classes. Okay. Yeah, and so when you're predicting an output that is like this, there are a lot of constraints that has to be there. So that's why I think it's called structured prediction. um okay, back to the uh, PDF. So this first she just talks about the earliest examples of structured prediction. um so it's like, yeah, so this particular one was like giving in an audio signal as the input. So X is an audio signal, and you have to like recognize the word being spoken. um yeah, I mean, this could be speech recognition, handwriting recognition, or something like that. um So the neural network that was used in this purpose is something called, I think it's called time delayed neural network. So what goes in as the input to this TDNN is acoustic vectors, um, and then I think you do some kind of Fourier transforms in this to turn it into uh, like feature vectors. Um, and then these feature vectors, I think, so what he says is you usually have one of these vectors every 10 milliseconds or something like that. And yeah, so these are the vectors that you get. So this TDNN is basically a, I think it's a convolutional net, a temporal convolutional net. And yeah, you pass these acoustic vectors to this convolutional net, and what you get are some feature vectors. And now the task at hand is, given these feature vectors that we got from the audio signal, we have to find like what is the word that is being spoken. So the example that he gives in the video is like recognizing which digit is being spoken. Like you have digits from 1 to 10, and the audio signal is of a particular digit being spoken, and you have to detect what is the digit being spoken. So what you need for that are word templates. um, so these are uh, word features that have been extracted for each of the 10 digits. So basically you ask a person to uh, pronounce these words from 1 to 10, and then you record the, I mean, you get the features that you get from each of those words. So this is the audio feature for word 1, this could be the audio feature for word 2, word 3. And when I say word 3, I mean the actual word 3 being spoken. And yeah, um so yeah, so the thing here is there is a latent variable that exists here. So the latent variable is basically like where does, so a word is composed of phonemes, right? You have sounds that are inside a word. Like when you say the word 3 or 7, something like that, you first say and then and things like that, right? You have phonemes inside that. So sometimes you may stress on one particular phoneme for a longer time, and uh, some people may pronounce words faster, some people may pronounce some slower. So your model has to be robust to that. So that's what a latent variable is. You actually, it is, latent variable is something that's hidden. So I can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think my internet just got a bit uh, glitchy. Okay. Yeah, so I just prepared a small thing about what latent variable is. We have seen this earlier, of course. Sometimes the output y depends on x as well as an extra variable z, which is the latent variable. And the thing about latent variable is we never know what the value is because it is hidden. That's what latent means. And these latent variables can provide auxiliary information, and the model is built in such a way that if we knew the value of the latent variable, the inference problem will become easier. So if I actually knew where the, so I mean, for example, in handwriting recognition, if I knew where one letter ends and the next letter begins, then my task is really easy. I just have to have a simple character recognizer. I can just feed in these individual characters, and uh, I get easy outputs, right? There's, it's a much easier task. But we don't have those uh, available. Yeah. And yeah, this is just a reference to the energy model thing. So in general, we'll search for the value of the latent variable that allows us to get an answer y of the smallest energy. So yeah, speaking in terms of energy models, you will have to minimize the energy by choosing the correct y and the correct z, the correct value of the latent variable. Okay. So going back to this, um, yeah, yeah. So the way, so in this particular problem, the way you uh, solve this is you actually have a matrix. Yeah, there's a algorithm called dynamic time warping that you use here to solve this problem of this latent variable. I had made something on that as well. So yeah, in time series analysis, dynamic time warping is one of the algorithms for measuring similarity between two temporal sequences. So yeah, that's what I had mentioned before. A particular word may be pronounced slowly or fast. For instance, similarity in walking could be detected using DTW even if one person. Okay, I just lifted this from Wikipedia. So what it basically talks about is yeah. So this GIF, I mean, it explains it nicely. So two persons may have the same walking style, or yeah, and even if one person is much slower than the other person, you can know that they are having the same walking style. Uh, yeah, by using dynamic time warping. That's the gist of it. Okay, and the way you do it is you line up the feature vectors um, on the x-axis of a matrix, and then you line up uh, you line up the uh, feature vectors from the word template for each of them on the y-axis, and then what you do is you take a similarity of this vector and this vector. So what you get is a matrix of scores. uh, Maybe I'll try to draw this. It may not look that good.
Sort of like attention, right?
um yeah, you are finding the similarity between vectors. Yep. So you have a matrix, and you have a you have the feature vectors that you get from the current audio signal, and then you have feature vectors from a particular word template, and then you have uh, a whole matrix of values with, and so this is the similarity between the zeroth uh, feature vector of the audio signal and the zeroth feature vector of a particular word template. And what you do after that is you yeah, you take the one with the lowest one with the highest similarity, um, or the lowest distance. Yeah, so this is actually the distance between these two vectors, and then you take the lowest path and you traverse along the whole thing. And yeah, so the values that you see in the matrix, you can refer to them as energy. So most of the time energy model is just an interpretation. Like, I don't think energy model was a thing when this particular model was made. So it's just an interpretation. So you can just yeah, you can just think of these distances that you see in the matrix as energies, and then you choose a path where the sum of the energies is the lowest, right? And yeah, and then you repeat this for all of the word templates. And the word template that gives you the lowest energy, that is uh, that is the answer basically. So this is how you do inference. And so in inference, you assume that these word templates are already, you get these word templates once you train, right? So you assume that the word templates are already correct. And for training, uh, like you said here, the feature extractor and the structure classifier are trained simultaneously in an integrated fashion. So these word templates, so during training phase, um, these word templates are actually trained along with this feature generator, which is TDNN. Um, so yeah, as we know, the task is to make the energy as small as possible uh, for the right word, and it has to be as large as possible for the wrong words. So for example, if we know that the word being spoken for a particular X, if it is the word two, what we do is we try to just modify this word template and bring it closer to this feature vector, and we also modify the feature vectors and bring it closer to the word template. Yeah, this sounds complicated, but that's how it's done during the training. And if it is a yeah, so basically we need to have some kind of uh, combined objective function which will push these word templates and feature vectors together if the word is correct, and for the wrong word templates, just push them apart. Yeah, so basically we do back propagation through the dynamic time warping. Yeah, are there any questions? I mean, even I only have a surface level understanding of this, so
Not a question, but a comment, Gautam, is that he actually does a better job of explaining this in week 11 video. If you, because I
yeah,
vaguely remembered this, so I went back and he covers it in,
yeah, I
when
remember
he's
that.
doing CTC loss. So
Mhm.
he does a much better job of explaining the details of this there. And he also says, I haven't looked at it, but he mentions it, so I thought I would follow up later. Is he says that differential time warping apparently is covered. He has a paper, Likun has a paper in which is called the Energy Based Tutorial, and in 2006, I think. And the last part of it apparently covers dynamic time warping.
What is the paper called? Dynamic time warping.
It's his energy-based tutorial paper.
Okay, okay, yeah. Mhm. Okay, I'll
I
check that
haven't
out.
looked at that, but just for reference. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Um, mm, okay. Yeah. So this is an example of uh, how structured prediction is done uh, using, yeah, how it was done using this TDNN model back in the day. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So next thing that he covers is energy-based factor graphs, uh, sum of factors. So in this particular section, what he says is you have some kind of, the total energy can be factorized uh, into sum of three different energies. Um, let's say E1, E2, E3. And so in this particular example, like what you have is an input X. So this could be something like an audio signal or something like that. And then you are trying, and what the model gives out is a sequence of 4 words which are being spoken in that audio signal. And those are Y1, Y2, Y3, and Y4. Yeah. So if this energy concept is a bit confusing, you can actually, most of the time, you can just replace the word energy with loss. I don't know if it's, yeah, to me, it made intuitive sense. Most of the time, if you just replace the word energy with the word loss, it still makes sense. Like, I think, yeah. And so you can look at this model like, I'll just draw a quick figure for this. Suppose you have a black box neural net, and you have an audio signal that's going inside, which is X. And it's just producing a sequence of words which is being which was maybe a sentence is being spoken, and X is the audio signal for that, and it gives out a sequence of words. How do I type? Yeah, which is Y1. Okay, maybe I'll just write it down. Y1, Y2, Y3, and Y4, right? So yeah, a model is there X, which is giving you uh, prediction of the words being spoken in X, which is Y1, Y2, Y3, and Y4. And then you need some kind of loss for this model, right? And so this loss, what can be done is like you can take Y1 and Y2 together, and then you can have some loss function by taking these two together, because so I'll just show this for example. So what he says is these blue factors ensure grammatical consistency. So the example that he gives is like when you have a sequence of words, a verb usually does not follow another verb. So that is just one example of uh, grammatical consistency. So you can think of a model, uh, you can think of y1 and y2 coming together, and then there is a loss function which which would ensure the same thing, something like uh, a verb does not follow another verb. So you have a loss, so this can be L1, and then you have y2 y3, and you have another loss which is L2, and you have y3 y4, and then you have another loss which is L3, and then you can add all of these three and you have the total loss L, and then you want to minimize uh, the total loss L, and yeah, that's how you do back propagation. I mean, that's essentially what is happening here. I just replaced the word energy with loss. I mean, that helped me understand it a bit more. But usually energy is, usually you have a more complex objective function. You just don't take the energy itself as the loss, so but energy will be part of the loss. So the
Gautam, isn't at least my understanding of the equivalence is energy viewed as the inverse of probability. So that's what he keeps repeating, that wherever energy is low, view it as high probability, and whenever energy is high, then view that as low probability. And in fact, he keeps repeating that when he says, for example, in contrastive loss, you make the energy of the desired output low, that means you make the probability of the desired output high. And probability of all unmatched things low means energy of all unmatched things high.
Yeah, but he also says like probabilistic approaches. I think he said they do not work when you are doing structured prediction, right? When you have very large number of possible classes. I think that's what he said.
Yeah, no, the I was more referring to how to conceptually
Interpret.
think about energy and in the probabilistic world is interpret anything as with low energy as high probability and high kind of the inverse of probability is energy.
I mean, it's the same thing as, I mean, then it's still equivalent to thinking of energy as loss, right? It is still equivalent, right? Because you want low loss for correct answers. Yeah.
Yeah, you minimize the probability of the match of what you desire and the input values to be low or high, depending on.
Yeah.
So sum of factors, there seems like there is a little different. So I was thinking in terms of sequence prediction, in the something like an RNN. With RNNs, the loss at each stage is multiplicative, right? So you basically just keep multiplying, and that's where you have the vanishing and the exploding gradients. But here they're talking about sum of factors. So that's interesting, I thought. I mean, is there a connection?
Could you repeat the RNN thing again? How is it multiplicative?
So RNN is basically, as you proceed through the sequence, you keep multiplying. So it's multiplicative, right? So in the forward pass, you go back and then you take the gradients and then you multiply the gradients with each other as you go backwards, right? So and that's what it leads to the exploding and the vanishing gradients, right? If the gradient is more than one, it keeps getting bigger and bigger. If the gradient is less than one, it keeps getting smaller and smaller. So, and because it's multiplicative, it's you can see the effects a lot more. Here, however, they say it's a sum of factors. So at each stage, the energy that you get out of each of the y's, you add, I think, right?
Yeah, energy is added. Yeah.
So that looks like a little different here. Maybe it's more stable this way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure of that. But in an RNN, like if you have an encoder that encodes an audio and you are decoding it into words, in that case the loss is added, right, for each of the words.
Is it? I'm not sure.
Like you have an RNN which is giving an output of one word at each step in the decoder. In that case, you just add the loss at each of the decoder steps, right? Like you have a softmax at step 1.
You at each step you take the output of the previous step as your context, and then you take the next x basically to compute your next y. I see where you're getting.
But you have a loss at each step, right?
Yes. So I think when you're talking about beam search, or basically deciding which y to use, right? So there, I think, yeah, you're right. So I think there is equivalence there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and then inference is easy. Dynamic programming or so inference is basically for what values of y1, y2, y3, y4 am I getting the lowest energy. So that's what inference is. Yeah. So sometimes you have latent variables, like we have mentioned what latent variables could be. And so you need yeah, so basically what he's discussing henceforth is how these factor graphs help in having efficient inference algorithms. That's what he's discussing in the future slide, in the coming slides. um so yeah, so factor is basically you're like factorizing the whole energy into individual additive functions. um so for example, the energy is obviously a function of y, the latent variable z and x. um so that total energy is factorized into four different components. The first one is a function, and these components are always functions of subsets of the bigger thing. So this one is only a function of x z1, this one is a function of x z1 z2, this one is a function of z2 y1, and this one is a function of y1 y2. And yeah, um so your task is to, so for inference your task is to find out for which values of, so obviously the task is to find y because that's your label. Anytime you do inference, you are given an x and you want to find out what y is. What y, here there are two labels, so you want to find out what y1 and y2 are. But then you also have these intermediate latent variables, so you also want to minimize with respect to z as well. So you want to find out what are the values of z1, z2, y1 and y2 such that your energy is minimum. So in this particular example, z1, z2 and y1 are binary. So you can have two possible values for these intermediate latent variables, and y2 is ternary. This is supposed to be y2. It's a typo. Y2 is ternary. So the naive approach to do inference. So what you can do is just take all possible values of z1, z2, y1, y2 and find out the energy in each of these cases, and then see which one is the lowest, and then take the corresponding value of y1 and y2. That's your answer, right? But this is exhaust, I mean this is very inefficient. You don't have to do that. um, um, and the way you make it efficient is by using dynamic programming and things like that. So this particular energy factor ea, it has only two possible outputs, because so what we are given is an x and we want to find y, right? So for a given x, z1 has only two values. So what we can do is we pre-compute the two possible values of ea. Similarly, what are the possible values that eb can take? It can take 2 into 2, right? So four possible values. eb can have only four possible values, so you pre-compute these four. Similarly, here you pre-compute four possible values of ec, and then you pre-compute six possible values of ed. So you have 16 values. So all you have to do is pre-compute these 16 possible energy factor values, and then you have something called a trellis. um, so this trellis is just a graph like structure. It has a source node and a target node, and so every path in this graph corresponds to a particular configuration that you have chosen. Okay. um, so at the first case, your z1 can be either 0 or 1, and you can write, and you know the actual energy uh, which will be and you know the actual energy that will come as a result of Z1 being 1. So you can write that energy on top of this arc. And if your Z1 is 0, you know what the energy is, and you can write that energy on top of this arc. And then you have to choose the value of Z2. Z2 is again binary. It can be either 0 or 1. So you can just write that energy. Since you have already pre-computed those energies, you can just write those on top of these arcs, and so on. You can proceed with the graph. So each path in this graph, so you want to go from the source node to target node. Each path represents a particular configuration, and then all you have to do is choose the shortest path uh, to go from this to this end. uh, I think there are many efficient algorithms like shortest path algorithms uh, that you can do, like I think maybe Dijkstra's algorithm, I'm not sure. So you can just choose one of those algorithms, and it's a very efficient way to find out the values of Z1, Z2, and Y1, Y2, which gives you the lowest energy. Yeah, so all you had to do was compute 16 values, and you were able to efficiently do the inference, as opposed to doing 96 factor evaluations, which is the naive way of doing it. And the way we are able to do this is because of the factorization, right? Because you were able to get these local factors. Yeah, but even though all of this made sense, the part that's confusing is how do you even get something like this? Like, yeah, I have never seen something like this uh, anywhere in the wild. Like, yeah, if any of you have seen something like this, yeah.
Yeah, I think you can do some kind of like a Markov assumption, right? You say that the state at position at time t is dependent only on the state at time t minus 1, or dependent only on time t minus 1 and t minus 2, right? So you're effectively you're saying that not everything is not related to everything anymore. Temporally only, you go back a certain amount. So that way you can kind of break up this, the dependencies here, right? So if you look at the last one, let me increase the size. ED, right? ED Y1, Y2, the last bit. So ideally, it should depend on all the x's, or all the x, the z1, z2, y1, and everything, right? But you basically say that no, it doesn't. My assumption is that it only depends. So ED y1, y2 would only depend on y1 and y2, but not on the other stuff, right? So it's you make the judgment call there, and you basically break it up. I think maybe. Yeah.
So do you know how do we arrive at how many latent variables and how many, like what does that actually mean? I know what latent variables are, but how do we know how many latent variables are there and how many values it can take?
I think of them as like if you think of this as an RNN now, right? The latent variables are basically the hidden states.
Okay.
Right. But here, of course, the whole idea is different, right? You are trying to minimize your energy by choosing a particular latent variable so that the y is maintained, right? The best z value for the lowest e value. But I think it's kind of equivalent. Right?
But is this type of inference actually done anywhere? Or I mean, I want to understand like why Jan is teaching us this stuff. Like, is it actually relevant anywhere right now?
It's probably part of the whole energy-based model ideas. And again, I mean, this is probably I'm saying heretical things, but I don't really. I think this is Jan's favorite models. That's why he's teaching it.
Yeah, I mean, even I felt something like that, because you don't see this in other deep learning courses. As far as I know,
Yes,
I've not seen this type of lectures. Yeah, but
this is interesting.
It is definitely interesting because I've not learned about these before. Yeah.
And this bit about the trellis, I think it's standard dynamic programming. Basically, you pre-calculate all the intermediate steps, so you don't have to calculate them again. So essentially, you reframe your problem so that the intermediate steps are kind of pre-computable, right? And then you just run through it, because you already have most of your steps pre-computed, so it's much easier computation-wise.
Yep. Yeah, this part made sense to me. Like, how do you make the inference faster? Yeah.
And also, Srinivas might want to say, this seemed a lot like autoregressive models, right?
Yeah, it's kind of more of latent model-based inference, but again, I've just started to dive into the variational inference for variational auto encoders. And there's a lot of similarity, and a lot of this is also based on probabilistic modeling, which is a field by itself.
Yes, that's true.
So
that's probabilistic graphical models, or just
probabilistic modeling. Even just ultimately, a lot of inference and a lot of machine learning is, or there's equivalences, and then there's a whole field of probabilistic modeling, which we haven't at all covered in any of the courses we have done over in Vimeo, but that's a lot of this has overlaps with that.
Yeah, it's a lot to learn. Yeah.
Independent of graphics, just probabilistic modeling is a very big field by itself. A lot of math underlying graphical models, as well as just probability-based models and Bayesian models.
I think we have Bayesian in the next lecture. I'm not sure. I think there is Bayesian. Okay. So what I talked about right now was inference. So he also talked about how do you do training for this type of thing. So in training, what you have is X and you have Y1 and Y2. You never have the latent variables. So in that case, the path is kind of known, right? So you know what Y1 and Y2 are, and so the correct path should include those particular arcs, which includes the correct value of Y1 and the correct value of Y2. So what that results in is only a subset of all the paths are valid now, and we minimize the energy with respect to Z1 and Z2 by constraining Y1 and Y2, right? Because we already know those values, and then we tweak the model, the energy model, to have lower energy for those to make the energy lower for the correct example, and we also want to make the energy higher for the wrong paths. That's how you do training every time, right? You want to make the energy lower for the right answers and higher for the wrong answers. So you choose a suitable loss function or objective function which considers both of that into account. So it's called discriminative training. That's what he refers to it as, discriminative training for structured prediction. Simple energy based factor graphs with shallow factors. So here talks about conditional random fields here. So conditional random fields is something that I've come across in NLP. I have not studied it before, but think it's used in NER models and things like that. So in this type of model, you have in each of the factors, you have a small neural net. There is a feature extractor which takes in X and Y1 and Y2, and then it. So this is basically a small neural net inside, and then it multiplies with a some weight vector, and overall energy is a sum of the individual energies, just like we saw last time. And when you use NLL loss, negative log likelihood loss, it's a conditional random field. And so NLL loss is basically, I think it's just same thing as cross entropy, right? Uh, you make the energy of or the score of the right answer lower. I mean, the score should be high, which is equivalent to the energy being lower, and then all the other energies should be made as large as possible for the wrong answers. Yeah, and if you use hinge loss, yeah, for this particular model you use a hinge loss. So in hinge loss, the energy of the correct answer should be low, and the energy of the among the wrong answers, the lowest energy among the wrong answers should be pushed up. That's what you do in hinge loss. And yeah, the difference between those two should have a particular margin. So basically the energy of the right answer and the lowest energy among the wrong answers should have a margin. And yeah, that's hinge loss. And then there's perceptron loss as well. I think it's similar to the hinge loss without the margin. CRF is an energy-based factor graphs. The factors are linear in the parameters. The factors take neighboring output variables as inputs. Yeah, like I said, CRF is used in part of speech tags in NER. So I just looked this up like before the call. Like even now, if you go to the state of the art of NER, you can see the word CRF in there. I've not studied what CRF is, but yeah, LSTM CRF.
Yeah,
So
you
I
can
guess
think
there
of it
is
as an attention mechanism. Basically, it's an early form of attention.
So you just have this CRF at the end of the actual LSTM, right? So that
Yes.
Since it helps in the structured prediction. Yeah, the basic concept of what I understood from it is so when you have, it's the same thing as what I had explained before. So if Y1 is a verb, then Y2 has very less likelihood of being a verb, right? So the CRF part of the model actually is like, I think even he mentioned it, it's like a small language model. It ensures this type of grammatical consistency. And then yeah, if again the same thing, if it just take the neighbors into account and while deciding the loss. And by doing that, what it's doing internally is it's ensuring grammatical consistency, and then you add up all of those losses to get the total loss. So this is just an interpretation in the field of NLP, but obviously it's used in other areas as well. Yeah. X is a sentence, Y is a sequence of part of speech tags, X is an image, Y is a set of labels for each window in the image. Okay. Yeah. So as we saw, CRF is having a linear linear neural net here, shallow factors. Sometimes you have deep non-linear factors for the purpose of speech and handwriting. yeah, he just discussed about some models that were used earlier with different types of losses. Minimum empirical error loss, NLL. Okay, I think it's nothing much here. Training the feature extractor as part of the whole process. Okay. So next we come to graph transformer networks. So this, first of all, this transformer has nothing to do with the new age transformer. This word has been hijacked by NLP now. Um, so this particular model was used for handwriting recognition. Yeah, so let's just go into this. So the task here is, as I've said, it's handwriting recognition. You are given an image which has a sequence of symbols, right? And you want to recognize the word or series of numbers that are part of the image. So the main thing here is we don't know how to segment these image into the actual characters, into the discrete characters or digits, because it's handwritten, right? And so this is an example of the latent variable that we have been discussing. We don't know the actual boundaries where the first digit ends and the second digit starts. Yeah, so what they do initially is they basically divide it into, they make different ways of dividing this into sequences of symbols. So you can divide it in this way, 3, and this, since this 4 is drawn badly, maybe in one iteration it looks like this. This gets divided like this, and sometimes it can get divided in this way, and so on. Yeah, so this basically they're building some kind of graph where each path is it's a possible way of breaking this image into separate characters, right? So each, yeah, so like I was saying, each path in this graph is a different way of breaking this image into its components. Yeah, and then you have something like a CNN which is already trained to recognize characters. Okay, individual characters. So it can take in an image of a character, and then it can say which digit it is from 0 to 9. And then so each node in this graph is actually an individual digit, or what it thinks is an individual digit rather, right? And then you have a model which has the capability to uh, identify a single character. It's probably a CNN or something like that. And each model, there are 10 different paths you can take from that. So maybe the first thing looks like a 3, right? So it will predict 3 with a low energy. It can predict it as a 2 with higher energy, which makes sense, right? Because it is a 3. And similarly, you have 10 different paths emanating from this first node. And then you go to the second node, and then you have 10 paths emanating from that. And then third node. And remember that each of these nodes actually represents one particular digit, right? And now it becomes similar to the trellis thing that we mentioned earlier. And yeah, it's basically same as that, and you just have to uh, choose the path of the lowest energy, and and it has to be done for each way of splitting as well. So for all of the ways of splitting it and the all of the ways of classifying it, you have to find out the path which gives you the lowest energy, and then just look at those numbers on those arcs. So yeah, so 3 is the lowest energy and then 4 is the lowest energy, then the result is 34, right? I hope that made sense. Yeah, you have a path selector. I guess this is just a dynamic programming thing, shortest path thing.
Actually, no, it's Viterbi. So if you look at the top, so
Okay.
basically, given a bunch of a sequence of tags, right? Or many alternative sequences of tags, like you have this GR cell right here. So you have basically a number of paths going from the source to the destination. So you can think of these as a sequence of tags. And each of these tags have emission probabilities and transition probabilities, right? So how probable is that this will appear at all? And given a number, how probable is it that it will emit the next number, right? So this is what you have it in your database, because basically you scan your data and create those numbers. Using that, Viterbi will try to find Viterbi is basically says it can find the most probable sequence of tags, right? So again, the most probable is the lowest energy, right? So it's all interconnected. So basically it will find, it's not a shortest path here, but it's basically the lowest energy path, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's equivalent, right? Is it not equivalent?
Probably, but Viterbi basically finds the lowest,
is it a, it's not a neural net, right?
No, Viterbi is basically rule-based. So yeah, you basically calculate all the forward probabilities, and then you find you calculate from back, and you find the least, the weight path basically. It's a little more complex than just adding the numbers up. Basically, you create all the numbers and then you work backwards, from the target to the destination, and you choose the lowest path in that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I don't think he talks about this in the lecture. I'm not sure.
No, you can see if hidden Markov models. Viterbi is an kind of a spin on the hidden Markov model. Right? So it's like an offshoot of it.
Okay, thanks. Um, yeah, he talks about how do you train this as well. So first you have the segmenter, which is basically the different ways you can segment the image into discrete characters, which is what I talked about earlier. And then you have the CNN model. I mean, which is trained to recognize individual characters. So these are all just this copies of the same model, and then each individual character goes into this neural net and it's predicted as. So for example, let's take this one. So this particular image was predicted as a 1 with energy 0.1, and it was predicted as a 4 with energy 2.4, which makes sense, right? Because looks like a 1, so the energy for prediction 1 is low. And then you have a path selector, which selects the lowest energy path, and then you have the Viterbi transformer. So what I thought was just choosing the lowest energy path, but I guess it's something more complex than that. And then finally you have a path, and then you add the energies for that path, and obviously what you want to do is this is lower that energy. So during the training phase, we already know the answer, right? We know it's 34. Okay, yeah. So the small mistake in what I said, you already know the answer is 34, so you just take that path, and then you add up the energies, and you yeah, just do backpropagation to lower that energy. I hope that made sense.
So in this case, you have.
I had a question.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vijay.
No, I was saying that, the path selector, knowing that you're 34, it actually chooses two paths that are 34.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And then okay.
And then it chooses which one is the better one from
Better
using
one.
better.
Yeah.
That's okay, cool.
Yeah, I missed that. Yeah.
The question I had is, in the diagram that has the interpretation graph, is he just illustrating with the examples, and in the general case, it would form charts for all probabilities? Because, for example, he shows, on the second to last neural network, it produces probabilities for 4 and for 9. Now, 9 is obviously, chosen, I thought, just because the 4 might look like a 9, but is it just illustrative to say 4 is 0.6, so it's low energy, and 9 is 1.2, so it's high energy? And in the general case, it would be 4 and all of the rest of the digits.
Yeah.
Am I understanding that correctly, or is
Yeah.
it specific? It is
No, it
that
would have
case, right?
all 10. So it's just due to the lack of space, he is not showing it. So there would be all 10. Okay. And yeah, the path selector should choose the best path out of all of those paths. Yeah.
And it would basically push down the correct and push up the rest.
Yes. Yeah. Sujit, you had something to add?
No, I think that's what it is. Maybe he's just showing the top two from each CNN.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this particular phase, what I showed was just pushing down on the energy of the lowest on the correct answer. Yeah, since you already know the correct answer, you calculate the energy of that path, and then you do backprop to reduce the energy of that for that correct answer. And then you also want to push up on the other energy values, right? So in this case, what you do is you just take the path with the lowest energy. You don't look at what is the right answer, what is the wrong answer. All of that is ignored. You just take the path of the lowest energy. And this is similar to hinge loss. I mean, slightly different. I think it is similar. This is actually the perceptron loss. So you just take the lowest energy without any consideration of the right or wrong. And then, energy of the desired answer. So for the right answer, you have an energy, and then energy of the best answer, which is the lowest energy. So obviously you want this thing to be lower than this, right? So that is why the subtraction of energy of desired answer minus energy of best answer can be taken as a loss. And when you minimize this, obviously this thing goes down, and anything which is the best answer and is actually wrong, it goes up, right? So this is basically perceptron loss. It is kind of similar to hinge loss, just a small difference. Yeah, actually that's all I had for today. I'll be covering the rest. There are only few slides, but I think there are some complex topics coming up, so I did not have time to cover those. Yeah. Any questions, comments? Yeah, up till now. Okay. Yeah, so we'll be covering the rest of the lecture in the next one. If I feel that there is not much to cover, I'll maybe we'll do the next one as well together with, I think Sujit, you'll be the one doing, right?
Yes, I can prepare for next week. in case you are able to finish,
yeah, I'll let you know before it's yeah,
okay.
I'll let you know earlier if I'll be able to do it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's all I had. Thanks for joining today. Thanks everyone.
Cool.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Gaurav.